The laughter started softly, like a ripple across crystal glasses, then grew bolder as it traveled through the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. It wasn't cruel at first. It was the polite, well-dressed laughter of people who believed they were better than someone else. Claire Holloway stood near the edge of the room, holding a champagne flute she hadn't touched, while the sound washed over her like cold rain. She felt it before she heard it. The looks, the sideways glances, the brief pauses in conversation when people noticed her dress, simple, outdated, carefully pressed, but clearly out of place among Dior gowns and tailored tuxedos. Someone near the bar leaned toward another guest and whispered. Another smile curled, amused, dismissive. At the center of the room stood her husband, Gregory Holloway. Gregory looked flawless tonight. His tuxedo fit him perfectly, his posture confident, his voice smooth as he laughed with investors and board members. One hand rested lightly on the back of Vanessa Reed, the woman beside him. She was young, radiant, and unmistakably not his wife. Her diamond earrings caught the light each time she tilted her head, drawing attention effortlessly. Claire watched as Gregory introduced Vanessa to a group of executives. He didn't look back, not once. A woman in a red gown glanced at Claire and smiled thinly. "Is that her?" she murmured, not bothering to lower her voice. Another replied, "I thought she'd stopped coming to these things." "Poor thing," someone else added. "He's clearly moved on." Claire's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Her heart beat steadily, almost unnaturally calm, as if it had learned long ago not to react too quickly. She had felt this kind of silence before, the kind that followed humiliation, the kind that pressed in on your chest but never quite crushed you. Vanessa laughed loudly at something Gregory said, then glanced over her shoulder. Her eyes met Claire's for half a second. Just long enough. Vanessa's smile widened. Not warm, not friendly, but sharp. Deliberate. A smile meant to be seen. Gregory finally turned. His gaze flicked toward Claire, then away, as if she were a misplaced chair or an inconvenient shadow. No wave, no acknowledgement, just distance. A server passed by with a tray of glasses. Claire caught her reflection in the mirrored wall, quiet, composed, almost invisible. No one in that room knew she'd once stood at whiteboards until midnight, building the foundation of the very empire they were celebrating tonight. No one knew how much of Gregory's success had been born at their kitchen table, scribbled on yellow legal pads while he slept. They only saw what he allowed them to see. The laughter rose again, louder now, as Gregory lifted his glass for a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. Applause followed, cheers, smiles. Claire finally took a sip of champagne. The bubbles burned slightly on her tongue. No one noticed the way her eyes hardened. No one sensed the shift happening quietly and visibly beneath the glitter and music. They thought the story was already written. They were wrong. At home, silence had rules. Claire learned them slowly, over years, the way someone learns the shape of a dark room by bumping into furniture. The apartment on Park Avenue was elegant, expensive, and emotionally airless. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, but the view belonged to Gregory. Everything did. Every morning followed the same rhythm. Gregory rose early, already scrolling through emails on his phone before his feet touched the floor. Claire brewed the coffee exactly how he liked it, strong, no sugar, and placed the cup beside his laptop without a word. He rarely said thank you, not because he was angry, but because he believed gratitude was unnecessary between a provider and what he considered support staff. Money was the quiet weapon. Claire didn't have access to their main accounts anymore. Gregory said it was simpler that way, that she didn't need to worry about investments or cash flow. He transferred a fixed amount to her card each month and called it generous. When she bought groceries, he commented on the receipt. When she ordered books, he asked why. When she mentioned replacing her old phone, he laughed and said, "What for? You barely go anywhere." She stopped asking. At dinners with clients, Gregory spoke for both of them. He told stories that made him sound self-made, brilliant, alone in his rise. When someone asked Claire what she did, he answered first. "She keeps things running at home," he'd say, smiling as if it were a compliment. Claire would nod, feeling herself shrink with each repetition. Sometimes, late at night, she sat at the small desk in the guest room, the only space that felt like hers, and opened a notebook. She wrote thoughts she never said out loud, numbers, patterns, ideas. Not because she planned anything yet, but because thinking was the only thing Gregory hadn't taken from her. The loneliness wasn't loud. That was the worst part. It lived in small moments. Gregory not noticing when she cut her hair. Gregory canceling anniversaries for meetings. Gregory telling her she was too sensitive when she tried to explain how invisible she felt. Each time she swallowed the words she wanted to say and replaced them with silence. He mistook that silence for weakness. What Gregory never understood was that Claire wasn't quiet because she had nothing to say. She was quiet because she was watching, learning, waiting. She had learned long ago that survival didn't always look like resistance. Sometimes it looked like patience. And patience, when mixed with intelligence, could become something far more dangerous than anger. Gregory slept peacefully each night, confident in his control, unaware that the woman lying beside him had already begun to step away, emotionally first, deliberately, and without permission. The marriage wasn't breaking loudly, it was dissolving quietly, molecule by molecule, until one day there would be nothing left for him to hold. Vanessa Reed knew exactly when to strike. It happened during the second gala of the season, a private fundraising dinner held in a glass-walled venue overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The kind of place where every seat had been assigned weeks in advance, and every conversation carried weight. Claire arrived alone, as usual, her invitation addressed formally, without warmth. Gregory was already there, standing near the center of the room with Vanessa at his side, looking every bit like a man who had replaced his past. Vanessa was flawless tonight. Her dress was sleek, modern, cut to draw attention without appearing desperate. She laughed easily, touched Gregory's arm with practiced familiarity, and spoke as if she belonged in every room she entered. When she noticed Claire being guided to a seat near the back, her eyes flickered with interest. Opportunity. Midway through dinner, Vanessa rose with a glass in her hand, smiling brightly. "I just want to say," she began, her voice light and confident, "how inspiring it is to see women supporting their partners in different ways." A few people chuckled politely. Her gaze shifted to Claire. "Not everyone wants the spotlight," Vanessa continued. "Some people are more comfortable behind the scenes, at home, keeping things simple." She tilted her head, faux thoughtful. "And there's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone is meant to evolve." The word lingered. Laughter followed. Soft, controlled, socially acceptable. Gregory smiled too. A small smile, but he didn't stop her. He didn't interrupt. He simply raised his glass and nodded, as if her words reflected something he believed himself. Claire felt the heat rise in her chest, but her expression didn't change. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and met Vanessa's gaze without blinking. Vanessa looked away first. After dinner, conversations buzzed louder. Claire overheard fragments as she passed through the room. "She's so gracious about it. I'd be devastated. Gregory deserves someone more dynamic." Vanessa approached her near the coat check, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "I hope I didn't offend you earlier," she said sweetly. "Sometimes honesty sounds harsh." Claire studied her face, the confidence, the ambition, the certainty. "No," she replied calmly. "You were very clear." Vanessa smiled, relieved. "Good. I believe clarity is kindness." As she turned away, Vanessa added quietly, "Not everyone gets to stay relevant forever." Claire watched her go, the room spinning slightly, not from humiliation, but from realization. This wasn't careless cruelty. It was intentional, strategic, and Gregory had allowed it. That night, alone again, Claire didn't cry. She opened her notebook, and for the first time, she wrote a name at the top of the page: Vanessa Reed. There was a time when Gregory Holloway used to ask Claire for help. It had been years ago, back when their apartment was smaller and the future felt uncertain instead of controlled. He would come home late, frustrated, pacing the living room with his jacket still on, complaining about market volatility, about investors who didn't understand risk the way he did. Claire would listen quietly, then sit beside him at the table with a notebook and a pen. "Show me the numbers," she would say. Gregory liked to tell people now that those early breakthroughs were instinct, that he had a gift. What he never mentioned was how often that instinct had been Claire's analysis, broken down patiently, refined over long nights while the city slept. She had a way of seeing patterns others missed, not flashy, not loud, just precise. The algorithm started as a side project. Claire had been building it for herself, a personal challenge, a way to stay sharp after stepping away from her career. It wasn't code-heavy at first. It was logic, probability, human behavior translated into risk models. Gregory watched over her shoulder, curious, impressed, and then quietly hungry. When he asked if he could use it for a presentation, she said yes. When he asked if he could integrate parts of it into his firm's strategy, she hesitated, then agreed, on one condition. "We'll formalize it later," she said. "I want it protected." Gregory smiled. He kissed her forehead. "Of course." Later never came. The firm grew faster than expected. Deals closed with uncanny accuracy. Investors praised Gregory's foresight. Articles called him visionary. Claire watched from the background as pieces of her work appeared in meetings and projections, in internal reports, always stripped of her name. At first, she told herself it didn't matter. They were married. What was his was hers. Then the language changed. "It's company property now," Gregory said once, casually, when she asked about formal documentation. "You weren't officially employed. Lawyers would complicate things." She felt the ground shift under her feet. Over time, access disappeared. Files she'd once reviewed freely were suddenly password protected. Meetings she used to attend informally became executive only. When she asked questions, Gregory accused her of mistrust, of jealousy, of not understanding how serious business worked. Claire stopped pushing. Instead, she started keeping records. Old emails, early drafts, time-stamped notes, versions saved on external drives Gregory didn't know existed. Not because she planned revenge, but because something inside her knew the truth mattered, even if no one wanted to hear it yet. Sitting alone now, years later, she opened one of those files. The algorithm was still there, her logic, her voice, her fingerprints all over it. Gregory had taken many things from her, but this was the one thing that could take everything back. The night after the gala, Claire didn't confront Gregory. That alone would have surprised anyone who still believed marriage arguments were loud, emotional, explosive. Claire moved quietly through the apartment, changed into comfortable clothes, and listened to the familiar sounds of Gregory on a late conference call in his office. His voice was confident, relaxed, completely unbothered. Whatever had happened in that ballroom had not followed him home. That was the moment something shifted. Claire sat at the small desk in the guest room, the one Gregory never used. She opened her notebook, the same one she had filled with half-finished thoughts and abandoned ideas over the years. This time, she didn't write emotions. She wrote facts, dates, names, timelines. She began listing every instance where Gregory had referenced his proprietary model, every public statement, every investor deck she remembered seeing. Silence, she realized, had protected him long enough. She stopped responding to his comments about money. When he questioned her purchases, she nodded and adjusted. When he dismissed her opinions, she let them drop. Outwardly, nothing changed. Inside, everything did. Claire wasn't retreating. She was reorganizing. She started waking earlier, not to make coffee, but to think. She reread old emails, cross-referenced them with saved files, and reconstructed the path of the algorithm from concept to execution. She didn't rush. Rushing was for people driven by panic. Claire was driven by clarity. Gregory mistook her calm for surrender. He became more careless. He left documents open on his tablet. He took calls in shared spaces, assuming she wasn't listening. He talked freely about upcoming deals, about expansion, about how investors trusted him completely. Each word confirmed what Claire already knew. One evening, Gregory glanced up from his laptop and smirked. "You've been awfully quiet lately," he said. "I assume that means you've accepted how things are." Claire looked at him, truly looked, and smiled softly. "I suppose I have." He took that as victory. What he didn't see was the spreadsheet she closed moments later, or the secure folder she had created under a name so dull he'd never open it. He didn't see the way her thoughts moved now, not in circles, but forward, deliberate, precise. For the first time in years, Claire felt something close to control, not over him, over herself. Silence was no longer something forced upon her. It was something she chose, a tool, a shield, a blade kept hidden until the moment it mattered. That night, as Gregory slept easily beside her, Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing steps instead of arguments. There would be no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no plea for recognition. When the truth finally surfaced, it would do so on her terms, and by then, it would be far too late for him to stop it. Claire chose the lawyer carefully. She didn't walk into a glass tower or a firm with her husband's name on the donor wall. She chose a modest office downtown, the kind that smelled faintly of paper and old coffee, where success wasn't advertised but earned quietly. The attorney, Michael Arden, had a reputation for handling complex financial disputes. He was supposed to be fair, objective, smart. He listened without interrupting as Claire explained. She spoke calmly, laying out the timeline, the algorithm, the years of undocumented use. She showed him copies of early drafts, emails sent from her account long before Gregory's company claimed the model as proprietary. Michael nodded, occasionally jotting notes, his expression unreadable. When she finished, there was a long pause. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said finally, folding his hands. "This is an uphill battle." Claire expected that. "I know. You don't have formal contracts. You weren't on payroll. You're married to the man you're accusing." He sighed. "In cases like this, perception matters, and perception is not on your side." She felt the sting, sharp and unexpected. "The evidence is real." "I'm not saying it isn't," Michael replied. "I'm saying proving ownership will be expensive, aggressive, and public. Your husband has resources, influence. He will bury this in motions and delay until you run out of money or patience." Claire sat back slowly. "So you're refusing?" Michael hesitated, then nodded. "I can't take this case, not like this." For the first time in weeks, Claire felt something crack. Not loudly, just enough to let disappointment in. She gathered her folder carefully, her movements precise. "Thank you for your time." As she stood, Michael added, almost apologetically, "Sometimes the smartest move is to walk away with what you have left." Claire met his eyes. "Sometimes." Outside, the city moved on without her. People hurried past, phones pressed to ears, coffee cups in hand. Claire sat on a bench and let the noise blur. She wasn't angry at Michael. He told her the truth as he saw it. The system favored men like Gregory, men with titles, men with teams of lawyers already waiting. That realization didn't break her. It clarified her. Legal justice, she understood now, wasn't guaranteed. It had conditions, and if she couldn't meet them yet, she needed another way in, another angle, another ally. That night, she returned home to Gregory's casual indifference, his assumption that nothing could touch him. Claire watched him from across the room and felt no fear. If the door to justice was closed, she would stop knocking. She would find the one person who had the authority to open it from the inside. And this time, she wouldn't ask politely. Vanessa Reed had always believed she was the exception. She told herself that story the first night Gregory invited her to dinner without mentioning his wife. She repeated it when he explained that his marriage was already over, that Claire was more like a habit than a partner. Vanessa was smart enough to know men lied. She just believed this lie benefited her. That illusion began to crack on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Vanessa was in Gregory's office, seated comfortably at his desk, scrolling through emails on her tablet while he was in a meeting down the hall. She wasn't snooping, not intentionally. She had simply opened the wrong folder while looking for a presentation file he'd asked her to review. The document that appeared wasn't labeled clearly. It was just numbers, dense, technical, familiar, too familiar. Vanessa frowned and zoomed in. The logic behind the projections caught her attention immediately. This wasn't Gregory's style. She had worked with him long enough to know his limits. He was charismatic, persuasive, excellent at selling ideas. But this kind of structural precision came from somewhere else. She searched deeper. Old files surfaced, timestamps from years ago, drafts created long before Gregory's firm claimed the model as proprietary. One file name stopped her cold. It wasn't professional. It wasn't corporate. It was a woman's name, Claire. Vanessa leaned back slowly, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sentimental about wives. She'd never pretended to be. But she was deeply practical, and what she was seeing unsettled her. Gregory hadn't just been dishonest with his marriage, he had been reckless with his secrets. Later that evening, she tested him. Over drinks, she mentioned an investor who had raised concerns about intellectual property. Gregory laughed it off too quickly. "People love to speculate," he said. "That's why they're not in charge." Vanessa smiled, but her mind was racing. Over the next week, she paid closer attention. Gregory took calls in hushed tones. He dismissed questions about documentation. When she suggested formalizing ownership structures, he brushed her aside. "Trust me," he said. "I've handled this for years." That was the problem. He had handled it alone. Vanessa began to understand her real position in Gregory's life. She wasn't a partner. She wasn't even a long-term plan. She was a distraction, a symbol, something shiny to display while the real machinery stayed hidden. And if things went wrong, she would be expendable. That realization hit harder than any insult. One night, unable to sleep, Vanessa searched Claire Holloway online. There wasn't much, no social media presence, no interviews, just fragments, an old academic paper, a quiet mention in a financial forum years ago, enough to suggest depth Gregory had never acknowledged. Vanessa closed her laptop and sat in the dark. For the first time since meeting Gregory, she felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt, fear. Because she finally understood the truth. Gregory didn't just betray his wife. He was fully capable of betraying anyone who trusted him, and she had trusted him far too much. Vanessa didn't reach out to Claire right away. For days, she carried the knowledge like a weight in her chest, heavy and unwelcome. She watched Gregory move through meetings with his usual confidence, watched him talk about future deals as if nothing could ever touch him. Every smile he gave her now felt rehearsed. Every promise sounded temporary. The decision came on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Gregory had flown to Chicago for what he called a critical investor dinner. Vanessa knew better than to ask questions. Instead, she sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through her phone until she found the number she'd saved and never expected to use. Claire Holloway. Vanessa stared at the screen for a long time before typing a message. She deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Finally, she sent something simple. "I don't know how else to say this, but I think you deserve to know what I've seen." Claire read the message 3 times before replying. "When can you talk?" They met the next morning in a quiet cafe far from Midtown, a place without glass walls or recognizable faces. Claire arrived first, calm and composed, dressed plainly. Vanessa entered minutes later, scanning the room instinctively, then froze when she saw Claire standing to greet her. This wasn't the defeated woman Vanessa had imagined. Claire's gaze was steady, curious, not hostile. They sat across from each other in silence for a moment. Then Vanessa spoke. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain her role in the affair. She went straight to the point. "He's been lying to both of us," she said, "about the algorithm, about ownership, about how exposed he really is." Claire didn't react. She simply nodded. "I know." That answer unsettled Vanessa more than anger would have. Vanessa pulled out her tablet and slid it across the table. "These are copies, files I shouldn't have access to, timestamps, internal notes. I made backups." Claire glanced at the screen, then looked up. "Why are you showing me this?" Vanessa hesitated. "Because when this collapses, and it will, he'll make sure someone else takes the fall, and I won't be that person." Claire studied her carefully, then closed the tablet. "You're not doing this out of kindness." "No," Vanessa admitted. "I'm doing it out of survival." Claire considered that. Then, slowly, she smiled, not warmly, not cruelly, just knowingly. "Then we understand each other," she said. They parted without shaking hands, without promises. But something irreversible had begun. Gregory believed he controlled every variable in his life. He didn't know that two women he underestimated had just rewritten the equation. And this time, the numbers would not work in his favor. Gregory didn't announce the freeze. He never did. Claire discovered it on a quiet Tuesday morning when her card was declined at a grocery store she'd visited for years. The cashier glanced up, embarrassed, as if the failure reflected on both of them. Claire apologized softly, stepped aside, and tried again with another card. Declined. The message on her phone arrived seconds later. "We need to talk about expenses. Call me." By the time she returned home, Gregory was already there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, irritation carefully controlled. "I've been reviewing our finances," he said, as if this were a shared concern. "You're spending more than necessary." Claire didn't argue. She didn't mention the cafe, the files, the backups. She listened as he explained that access to accounts would be temporarily restricted, that it was for the best, that she needed to trust him. Trust. The word landed like an insult. That afternoon, an email followed. A notice from his attorney. Preliminary divorce paperwork. No accusations, no drama, just efficiency. A suggestion that they separate amicably before things became uncomfortable. Claire read it slowly, twice. This was Gregory's real weapon. Not shouting, not humiliation. Erasure. He was attempting to starve her out quietly, to cut off time, money, and leverage all at once. If she panicked, if she reacted too early, she would lose everything she had spent years protecting. That night, alone in the guest room, Claire allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to feel it. The fear, the anger, the sharp edge of doubt that whispered maybe Michael the lawyer had been right. Maybe the system would crush her before she ever reached the door. Then she closed her eyes and breathed, because fear was what Gregory expected. What he didn't expect was how prepared she had become. Claire opened her laptop and reviewed what she still controlled. Copies of files stored off-site, a small account Gregory didn't know about, and now Vanessa's evidence. Internal documents that changed the balance of power completely. Still, the timing was wrong. Too early to move, too risky to strike. Gregory, sensing her silence, grew bolder. He stopped pretending. He spoke to her like a problem to be managed, not a person. "I suggest you cooperate," he said one evening, not looking up from his phone. "It'll go easier for you." Claire nodded. "I understand." Inside, something hardened. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about precision. Because if Gregory believed he had already won, he would make one fatal mistake. He would stop watching her, and when that happened, Claire would finally step out of the corner he'd pushed her into and take everything he thought was untouchable. The email arrived at 6:42 a.m. Claire noticed it only because it didn't come from Gregory's attorneys, or from the bank, or from anyone who had learned to speak to her as if she were already defeated. The subject line was brief, almost careless. "We need to talk today." The sender's name meant nothing to her at first, Nathaniel Cross. She didn't reply immediately. That was instinct now. Silence first, assessment second. Claire finished her coffee, watched the city wake up through the window, and only then opened the message fully. There was no explanation, no introduction, just a time, a location, and a single sentence at the bottom. "This concerns Gregory Holloway." They met at a nondescript office building downtown, far from Park Avenue, far from anything that suggested power. Claire arrived early. The waiting area was quiet, almost deliberately forgettable. No logos, no awards on the walls, just clean lines and neutral colors. Nathaniel Cross entered without ceremony. He was older than she expected, late 40s perhaps, with the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. His suit was plain, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile when he shook her hand, but his grip was firm, deliberate. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know you're under pressure." That alone made her look at him more closely. They sat. He didn't waste time. "I've been tracking irregularities connected to your husband's firm for over a year," he said calmly. "Shell structures, intellectual property disputes quietly buried, risk models that don't belong where they are." Claire's pulse remained steady. "Then you already know more than most." "Yes," Nathaniel replied, "but not everything." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were summaries, timelines, references to entities Claire recognized immediately. Her work, her algorithm, her name, finally, written where it belonged. "You're not listed as a victim," Nathaniel continued. "That's intentional. It keeps Gregory comfortable." Claire looked up. "So why talk to me now?" "Because his next move forces my hand," Nathaniel said, "and because you're the missing variable he never accounted for." There was no sympathy in his voice, no flattery, just clarity. Nathaniel leaned back slightly. "You have leverage you don't realize yet, and I have authority that operates very differently from divorce court." Claire felt something shift, not relief, not triumph, but alignment. For the first time since this began, the pieces in front of her made sense together. "What are you asking?" she said. Nathaniel met her gaze. "Nothing. Yet." He stood, signaling the meeting's end. "For now, I just want you ready. When the moment comes, you won't get a second chance." As Claire walked back into the city, the weight she'd been carrying changed shape. Gregory still believed he was alone at the top. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already being measured. The invitation reached Gregory Holloway just after noon. It came from one of his senior partners, marked urgent, requesting his presence at an unscheduled board meeting that evening. No agenda, no explanation, just a location. A private conference floor on Park Avenue, glass walls, skyline view, the kind of place where decisions were made quietly and consequences followed swiftly. Gregory frowned, then smiled to himself. He assumed this was good news. He arrived, confident, perfectly tailored suit, rehearsed charm, ready. The receptionist greeted him politely but didn't offer conversation. That was unusual. When the elevator doors opened, Gregory stepped into a boardroom already half full. Familiar faces sat around the table. Investors, legal counsel, senior executives. Too many, he thought. This was meant to be quick. Then he saw Claire. She was seated near the far end of the table, hands folded, posture calm, dressed simply but precisely, not as a guest, not as an observer, as if she belonged there. For a split second, Gregory thought he'd misunderstood the room. His smile tightened. He glanced around, waiting for someone to explain, to correct the mistake. No one did. "Take a seat, Gregory," one of the investors said. His tone was polite, controlled, final. Gregory sat slowly, his confidence dimming by degrees. He leaned toward Claire and lowered his voice. "What is this?" he whispered. "You shouldn't be here." Claire didn't look at him. "You'll understand soon." The meeting began without small talk. A senior analyst stood and projected a series of charts onto the glass wall. Revenue patterns, risk curves, forecast models Gregory recognized immediately, too immediately. His throat tightened as he watched his own presentations unfold, but reframed, dissected, stripped of ego. "These models," the analyst said, "have raised questions regarding ownership and disclosure." Gregory leaned forward. "I don't see the issue," he said smoothly. "All proprietary systems have been reviewed by counsel." "Have they?" another voice asked. Nathaniel Cross stepped into view from the side of the room. Gregory froze. He knew the name now. Everyone in his world did. Former prosecutor, Financial Oversight Authority, a man who didn't appear unless something had already gone very wrong. Nathaniel's gaze moved to Claire, then back to Gregory. "This meeting was convened to address material misrepresentation," he said calmly, "and potential exposure that affects everyone in this room." Gregory felt the walls closing in, not physically, but strategically. This wasn't a discussion, it was a trap, and for the first time, he realized he had walked into it willingly. The room felt colder once the screen went dark. Gregory shifted in his chair, forcing a smile that no longer reached his eyes. "I'm still not clear on the accusation," he said, his voice steady by habit more than confidence. "All proprietary systems used by my firm are legally owned. I've been advised accordingly." Nathaniel Cross didn't respond immediately. He nodded instead to Claire. She stood. The movement was simple, unremarkable, yet it drew every eye in the room. Claire didn't rush. She walked to the front with the same calm she'd carried for months, the kind that came from certainty, not bravado. When she turned to face the table, Gregory barely recognized her. "This model," Claire said, gesturing to the frozen projection behind her, "was not developed under Gregory Holloway's firm. It was not commissioned. It was not licensed." She paused, letting the words settle. "It was created independently," she continued, "over 6 years ago, by me." A murmur rippled across the table. Gregory let out a short laugh, sharp and forced. "That's absurd," he said. "My wife doesn't work in quantitative finance." Several heads turned toward him. Claire didn't flinch. "That's because I stopped," she replied evenly, "at your request." She tapped a remote. A new slide appeared. Dated files, early drafts, time-stamped emails. Her name was there, again and again, impossible to ignore. "I stepped away from my career to support yours," she said. "But I never transferred ownership. I never signed away my work, and I never consented to its commercial use." One of the investors leaned forward, frowning. Another whispered to counsel. Gregory's chest tightened. "You're saying this now?" he snapped. "After all these years?" "Yes," Claire said, "because now it matters." Nathaniel stepped in beside her. "We verified the documentation," he said calmly. "Independent experts confirm authorship. The intellectual property belongs to Mrs. Holloway." The title hung in the air. Mrs. Holloway, not as an accessory, as an authority. Gregory looked around the table, searching for support. He found none. Faces that once smiled easily at him now held distance, calculation, concern. Claire met his gaze for the first time that day. "You told everyone this was yours," she said quietly. "You let them laugh at me. You let me disappear so you could stand taller." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "This," she finished, "is where that ends." The silence that followed was absolute, and Gregory Holloway finally understood what it meant to lose control of a room. Gregory tried to speak, but no sound came out at first. He cleared his throat and leaned forward, palms pressed flat against the table. "Let's slow this down," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "This is being blown out of proportion. We're talking about marital assets, internal misunderstandings." No one nodded. One of the senior investors exchanged a glance with legal counsel. Another checked his phone, already disengaging from Gregory as if he were a risk instead of a leader. The shift was subtle, but it was final. Respect didn't vanish loudly. It simply moved on. Nathaniel Cross folded his hands. "This is no longer an internal matter," he said. "The use of unlicensed intellectual property materially affected valuations, disclosures, and investor decisions." Gregory turned sharply toward Claire. "You did this on purpose," he snapped. "You waited." "Yes," Claire replied. "I waited until the truth couldn't be buried." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Gregory looked around the room, panic now leaking through the cracks of his composure. "We can settle this privately," he said quickly. "Buyouts, licensing fees, whatever it takes." An investor finally spoke. "You should have thought of that before exposing us." Another added, colder, "You let us believe this was clean." The analyst returned to the screen, now displaying projected losses under revised assumptions. The numbers were brutal. Gregory stared at them, his jaw tightening, sweat gathering at his temples. These weren't abstract figures. They were his future collapsing in real time. "This meeting," Nathaniel said evenly, "will be followed by a formal inquiry. Effective immediately, your authority is suspended pending review." The word suspended echoed. Gregory pushed back his chair abruptly. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "I built this company." Claire stood again. "You built it on something that wasn't yours." Silence followed. Then the chair beside Gregory scraped softly as someone moved away from him, creating physical distance where there had once been loyalty. Gregory looked at Claire, really looked at her, and for the first time, fear replaced contempt. "You're destroying me," he said quietly. Claire shook her head once. "No," she said. "I stopped protecting you." Security appeared at the door, not aggressively, just present. A signal. Gregory gathered his things with shaking hands, every movement stripped of dignity. No one stopped him. No one followed. As the door closed behind him, the room exhaled. Claire remained standing, steady, as if the collapse around her had finally released something heavy from her chest. The man who had laughed last had just lost everything that made him powerful, and there was no appeal for that. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later, not by courier, not with drama. Just an email from Gregory's attorney, carefully worded, professionally distant, as if the man who had stormed out of the boardroom in disgrace was already a memory best managed on paper. Claire read the message once, then forwarded it to Nathaniel without comment. They met again that evening, not in an office this time, but in a quiet conference room overlooking the river. The city lights reflected off the glass, distant and muted. Nathaniel placed a thin folder in front of her. "You were smarter than he realized," he said. Inside were copies of documents Claire had signed years ago and nearly forgotten. A post-nuptial agreement Gregory had insisted on during one of his risk management phases. At the time, he'd framed it as protection for both of them. Claire had read every line before signing. Gregory hadn't. Clause 17 was precise. Any intellectual property developed independently and used without formal transfer remained the sole property of the creator, regardless of marital status. Any revenue derived from that property without consent constituted breach and forfeiture of shared claims in the event of divorce. Gregory had been so confident, so sure she would never need it. "He thought this would simplify things," Claire said quietly. "Yes," Nathaniel replied, "for you." The settlement negotiations were brief. Gregory's legal team pushed for discretion, for speed, for anything that would prevent further exposure. Claire didn't argue. She didn't demand apologies or explanations. She let the clauses speak for her. By the end of the week, it was done. Gregory retained none of the company shares tied to the algorithm, no spousal support, no leverage. What he kept was symbolic. Property already mortgaged, accounts already frozen, a reputation already in free fall. Claire signed the final page with a steady hand. When she returned to the apartment to collect her remaining things, Gregory wasn't there. The space felt strangely hollow, stripped of tension. She packed only what mattered: old notebooks, hard drives, a framed photo from before ambition had rewritten everything. On the kitchen counter lay a single envelope, Gregory's handwriting. No apology, just a sentence. "I never thought you would do this." Claire folded the note and left it behind. Outside, the night air felt lighter. Not victorious, just clear. The marriage hadn't ended in shouting or tears. It ended in paperwork. And for the first time in years, every signature belonged to her. Vanessa Reed watched the news break from the back seat of a rideshare, her phone glowing softly against the darkened window. Gregory's name scrolled across the screen beneath words like investigation, misrepresentation, suspended authority. She read each headline without emotion, only a growing sense of finality. She had known this moment was coming. What she hadn't anticipated was how quickly the world would turn its back. By the next morning, invitations stopped arriving. Messages went unanswered. A lunch she'd scheduled with a venture partner was canceled with a vague excuse about timing. The same people who once leaned in close, eager to be associated with Gregory's rise, now created distance as if proximity alone could contaminate them. Vanessa wasn't surprised. She had built her career understanding optics. And right now, she was toxic by association. She met Claire one last time, not out of obligation, but necessity. They chose a quiet cafe again, neutral ground. Vanessa arrived first this time, her confidence tempered, her movement slower. When Claire sat across from her, there was no tension, just recognition. "It's over," Vanessa said simply. Claire nodded. "I know." "I gave them everything," Vanessa continued. "The files, the timelines, statements." She exhaled. "They don't need me anymore." "No," Claire agreed. "They don't." Vanessa stirred her coffee without drinking it. "I don't expect forgiveness." Claire didn't offer it. This was never about that. For a moment, Vanessa looked relieved. Later that week, Vanessa packed her apartment in silence. Designer dresses went into storage. The jewelry Gregory had given her stayed behind. She booked a one-way flight, not out of panic, but clarity. The city had served its purpose. It was time to leave before it decided what she was. Her final meeting was with an attorney of her own. The terms were clear: cooperation in exchange for immunity, no public blame, no interviews. She would walk away without charges, but also without the future she'd imagined. As she stepped through security at the airport, Vanessa glanced once at her reflection in the glass. She looked older, not weaker, just stripped of illusion. Gregory had promised her power by proximity. What he'd almost given her was a prison. As the plane lifted into the sky, Vanessa closed her eyes, not in defeat, but acceptance. She would rebuild somewhere else, quietly this time, without shortcuts, without borrowed influence. Behind her, the city moved on. And for the first time, Vanessa Reed was no longer running toward someone else's spotlight. She was walking away from it. The city didn't pause for Claire Holloway. Traffic still roared down Fifth Avenue. Screens still flashed stock prices. People still hurried past one another with purpose and impatience. Yet as Claire stepped out of the office building that afternoon, something fundamental had changed, not around her, within her. She walked without destination, letting the noise blur into a distant hum. For the first time in years, no one was watching her closely. No one needed her to perform, to explain, to minimize herself. The absence of pressure felt unfamiliar, almost disorienting. She stopped at a small cafe and ordered a coffee she liked, not the one Gregory preferred. The barista asked her name. Claire answered without hesitation. When the cup was handed back to her, her name written clearly across the lid, she felt a quiet satisfaction she couldn't quite explain. Simple things mattered again. She sat by the window, watching strangers pass, and allowed herself to feel the aftermath. Not triumph, not joy, just space. The kind that followed a storm, when debris settled and the air smelled clean but raw. Messages waited on her phone, investors requesting meetings, attorneys seeking clarification, people who had never known her before, suddenly eager to know her now. Claire didn't answer them immediately. She wasn't ready to step into another role defined by expectation. Later, she walked through Central Park, leaves crunching underfoot, sunlight cutting through the trees. She thought about the years she had spent compressing herself to fit inside someone else's vision, about how easily that version of her had been dismissed, about how silence, once a burden, had become her weapon. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger required energy she no longer wanted to give. That evening in her new apartment, smaller, quieter, chosen by her, Claire unpacked slowly. She placed her notebooks on a shelf, set her laptop on the desk by the window. Everything had a place now, not because it had to, but because she decided it did. She stood there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the desk, breathing in the quiet. The aftermath wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches, no celebrations, just clarity. The battle was over. The noise had faded. And in its place was something far more powerful than victory: peace. Healing didn't arrive as a revelation. It came quietly in pieces, scattered across ordinary days. Claire learned this one morning as she sat alone by the window of her apartment, the city stretching out beneath a pale sky. There was no rush to be anywhere, no one waiting for her to perform a role. The stillness felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. She began with small rituals. Each morning she made coffee slowly, standing barefoot on the cool floor, listening to the sound of the kettle instead of emails or market alerts. She read again, not reports or legal documents, but books she'd once loved and set aside when life became about survival. Sometimes she underlined sentences. Sometimes she simply closed the book and let the words sit with her. Healing, she realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about reclaiming. She took long walks without headphones, letting her thoughts wander without direction. Memories surfaced unexpectedly, late nights at the kitchen table, Gregory asleep while she worked, moments she'd dismissed as insignificant that now revealed how much of herself she'd given away. She didn't push those thoughts aside. She let them pass through, unjudged. There were harder days, too. Days when doubt crept in, whispering that she should have fought sooner, spoken louder, demanded more. On those days, Claire reminded herself that survival had required silence once, that she had done the best she could with the knowledge she had at the time. That mattered. Nathaniel checked in occasionally, never intrusive, never urgent. His presence felt steady, respectful. They talked about logistics sometimes, about what came next, but mostly about nothing at all. Books, travel. The strange quiet that followed upheaval. There was no pressure, no expectation. Claire appreciated that more than he knew. One afternoon, she unpacked the last box from her move and found an old notebook from years ago. Inside were ideas she'd abandoned, concepts she'd never believed she was allowed to finish. She sat at her desk and opened a fresh page. This time, she wrote without fear of interruption. Healing didn't announce itself with fireworks or applause. It didn't demand acknowledgement. It unfolded slowly, steadily, like a body relearning balance after a long fall. Claire looked around her apartment, at the life she was rebuilding, not from revenge, but from truth. She felt no urgency to rush forward. For the first time, she trusted that she had time. And that was more than enough. Claire hadn't been looking for love. If anything, she had been carefully avoiding anything that resembled it, convinced that rebuilding her life required solitude, not complication. And yet, presence had a way of finding her when she least expected it. Nathaniel Cross never crossed a line. That was the first thing she noticed. Their conversation stayed grounded, practical, thoughtful, unhurried. He never spoke over her, never assumed, never framed her strength as something he had discovered. He treated her competence as a given, not a surprise. After years of being diminished by proximity to Gregory, that alone felt disarming. They met for coffee one evening to discuss a technical matter that no longer felt urgent. The conversation drifted naturally from work to books to the strange adjustment that followed upheaval. Nathaniel listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was with intention. "I spent a long time thinking control was safety," he said at one point, staring out the window. "It took me years to realize trust is quieter than that." Claire felt the truth of it settle between them. There was no rush, no sudden intimacy, just consistency. They began walking together sometimes, side by side through the city, not touching, not performing. Nathaniel never asked questions that pried. He let Claire decide what to share and when. That respect softened something in her she hadn't realized was still guarded. One night after dinner, they stood outside her building. The city hummed around them, familiar and distant all at once. Nathaniel hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I'm not here to fix anything," he said. "I know you don't need that. I just enjoy your company." Claire smiled. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't charged with expectation. It was honest. "So do I," she replied. What grew between them wasn't fireworks or obsession. It was steadier than that, a sense of safety built on mutual clarity, a connection shaped by shared restraint rather than urgency. They didn't talk about the future as a promise. They let it arrive gradually, unforced. For Claire, that mattered more than grand gestures ever could. This wasn't a love that demanded sacrifice. It was a love that made space, and for the first time she stepped into it without fear of disappearing. Claire never imagined herself planning another wedding. For a long time, the word itself felt heavy, burdened by memory and compromise. But this wasn't something she planned in the traditional sense. It unfolded quietly, the way everything meaningful in her life did now, without spectacle, without negotiation, without fear. The ceremony took place on a clear autumn afternoon just outside the city. No ballroom, no press, no performance. A small terrace overlooked the river, trees beginning to turn, sunlight soft and forgiving. The guest list was short. A few close friends, one or two colleagues who had become something closer to family. People who knew her story without needing it explained. Nathaniel stood beside her, calm as ever, dressed simply, his presence steady. He hadn't proposed with grand speeches or dramatic timing. He had asked one evening, quietly after dinner, as if the question itself didn't need an audience. "Would you like to do this?" he'd said. "Only if it feels right to you?" That was all. Claire said yes because nothing about the moment asked her to shrink. As she walked toward him now, she felt no nerves, no second-guessing, just clarity. The kind that came from knowing she wasn't stepping into a role but standing fully as herself. When Nathaniel took her hand, his grip was warm, certain, not possessive. The vows were simple, honest. They spoke of respect, of patience, of choosing partnership without erasing individuality. There were no promises of forever framed as obligation, only intention. When it was over, there was no dramatic kiss that demanded applause, just quiet smiles, laughter that felt earned, the sound of glasses clinking gently as people embraced them, not out of tradition, but genuine happiness. Later, as the sun dipped lower, Claire stood at the edge of the terrace and watched the water move steadily below. She thought about how far she'd come, about the woman who had once been laughed at in rooms like this, about the life she had rebuilt piece by piece without asking permission. Nathaniel joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. "You okay?" he asked softly. She leaned into him. "I've never been better." Somewhere in the city, Gregory Holloway's name was still attached to articles and cautionary stories. His downfall had become a lesson, But here, now, he didn't matter. This ending wasn't about him. It was about a woman who survived silence, reclaimed her voice, and chose a future that didn't cost her herself. And that made all the difference. Years later, the story still circulated in quiet conversations, not as gossip, but as caution. Gregory Holloway's name appeared occasionally in business articles now, usually buried near the bottom, attached to phrases like former executive or compliance failure. He no longer attended galas, no longer stood beneath chandeliers holding court. The world that once applauded him had moved on, efficient and indifferent. He lived alone in a smaller city, consulting occasionally, careful not to draw attention. Some nights he replayed moments he wished he could revise, the boardroom silence, the way Claire had looked at him without anger, the finality of it all. Regret followed him quietly. It didn't destroy him, it educated him, and that, perhaps, was the punishment he never expected. Claire rarely thought about him anymore. Her life had expanded in ways that didn't require comparison. She and Nathaniel built something steady together. Not perfect, not dramatic, but grounded. Mornings were slow. Evenings were shared. Decisions were mutual. There were disagreements, of course, but never erasure. She returned to her work on her own terms, not as a shadow, not as a secret. Her name appeared on papers, panels, advisory boards. People listened when she spoke, not because of what she had survived, but because of what she knew. And when young women reached out to her, uncertain and underestimated, Claire made time. She told them the truth gently. Silence can be survival, she would say, but it shouldn't be permanent. On quiet nights, she sometimes stood by the window and watched the city lights flicker on, one by one. She remembered the woman she used to be, the one who stood in rooms where laughter cut deeper than words, the one who believed endurance was the same as loyalty. She felt no bitterness toward that version of herself, only gratitude, because she had endured, and because she had learned when to stop. The story, in the end, wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about balance, about consequences that arrived without cruelty, about reward that didn't require vengeance. Gregory lost what he took for granted. Vanessa lost her illusions, and Claire gained something far more valuable than status or apology. She gained a life where her voice was never an afterthought, and that was the ending no one in that ballroom could have predicted. So that's where this story comes to rest. And if you're still here with us right now, really still here, then something in this journey must have touched you in a quiet but real way. Maybe it reminded you of a moment when you felt unseen. Maybe it echoed a time you stayed silent longer than you should have. Or maybe it simply made you pause. Stories like this aren't just about drama or justice. They're about life, about understanding that dignity doesn't always come from fighting loudly, but from knowing who you are when no one is clapping. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Claire didn't heal by destroying others. She healed by reclaiming herself. Another Stoic truth reminds us, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. And maybe that's the lesson that stays with us the longest. Healing isn't dramatic. Growth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like choosing peace, choosing clarity, choosing yourself. So if this story spoke to you, take a second, like the video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling stories that don't just entertain but understand you. Thank you for being here, truly.